Okay, I think we've got people joining. I think we'll make a start on this. So thanks very much for joining and taking the time to be with us here at Citrix today for this session, Through the Storm, Building a Long-Term Flexible Working Strategy. So this is obviously an unprecedented time, a word we've heard a lot of over the last 6 months. And we thought it might be useful just to share with you some of our learnings and some learnings from our customers of what we picked up during this time around flexible working, and also how we see the future going forward. So if I look a little bit at the agenda, hopefully, let's get that going, there we go. So we're going to start with a session from Sara Nelson, our HR director. We thought as an organization like Citrix that's been talking about remote and flexible working for many years, it might be interesting to share some of our own internal learnings from within our organization. I'm then delighted to have Albrecht from Ellipse Life here on the call as well. He's going to share some of the things that they've learned at that subsidiary of Swiss Re during that time. And then finally, we've got Sasa Petrovic and Per Johansson from Citrix, who will be talking a little bit about some of the trends and maybe looking into the future as to how this might work. In terms of some housekeeping rules, just wanted to ask any questions that you may have, if you could put those in the question box. We're very hopeful that there'll be a little bit of time at the end of each session that we can put some of those questions to the panelists. So yes, if you can put them in there, that would be great. We are, of course, recording this session as well, just so you're aware of that. Okay, so without further ado, perhaps I could invite Sara Nelson to join me here. And Sara, I'm going to hand over the presentation to you, and away you go. Sara.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. I can't see you, but I certainly hope to have some of your questions at the end of this session. As far as I'm concerned, the more questions and the more interactive this is, the better. So please do put in your questions, and I'll make sure that I don't talk too much and leave some time for to answer your questions at the end of this session. So first of all, let me give you some context about Citrix, because I don't assume that everybody knows exactly who we are. So you have some stats there on the screen to tell you a little bit more of our context. And we're in a very privileged position to have wonderful technology that allows us to have a great degree of flexibility in the way that we work. And so the recent pandemic was an opportunity for us to really test our technology in moving everybody to a remote way of working pretty much overnight. So prior to that, in March 2020, about 13% of our employees were working fully remotely, and then about 2/3 of us were working partly on site and then partly from home or other locations. But that doesn't mean, obviously, that COVID wasn't a very major disruption for us, but possibly less so than for some of other business sectors. You know, I can imagine that in a manufacturing environment, that would have been a very different experience. But then the Citrix culture and technology did allow us to move very quickly to almost 100%, and within just a very few days. So if I move us on a slide.
Sara, could you go on to full presentation mode, please?
Oh, yes, of course. I do apologize.
Thank you.
There we go. So as we moved then into very much the eye of the storm, we had several pieces to our game plan, if you like, and several factors in the mix. So obviously there was the action, we had executive sponsorship, we had combined expertise, and all of these pieces came together in our immediate action plan. So the action was the what. Obviously, all employees needed to work remotely very, very quickly, very immediately. But then the leadership communication that we were able to cascade down through the organization, which I'm sure is much the same in all of your organizations as well, was a very key piece. So our CEO, David Henschel, stayed very close to the communications piece by, communicating on a monthly basis in a very transparent way, which I think was quite reassuring for our employees. And then we pulled together, and again, I'm not saying that this was very different organizations, but it was important for us to have a very multidisciplinary team coming together with legal, HR, security, facilities, and so on. And then we opted to have our operational leaders in each site stay very close to this and take a leading role in actually driving decisions in their locations, very individually and in a very hands-on sort of way. And these were all the factors that went into driving the work strategy for each of these locations as we moved forwards, and which are still actually feeding into our longer term strategy as to what we will do on an ongoing basis at Citrix. So, next slide. One of the other factors that's been very important, let me just see if I can reduce down my window so I can see this better, is at Citrix, we've always done a lot of listening with our employees. And I'm sure, again, this is very similar to what a lot of organizations do. It's particularly important for us because what our employees are saying drives a lot of our thinking and a lot of our HR strategy and policy around people. So we wanted to hear right through the COVID crisis, and we're still doing it on a regular basis, what our people are feeling and thinking about how they're working and their employee experience. So we looked at a number of factors and pulled out from this listening, which is basically surveying, what they were saying about, their preference for how they were working, their, productivity, and a number of different factors. So their preference overwhelmingly, and this matches up with some external research that we're also looking at, as I'm sure you are, is that 2/3, and that's tracking upwards, in fact, would prefer to work in a hybrid way of working, which is very similar to the way we worked before. So a mix of office and remote. And then 25% would actually prefer to work full-time remotely. Productivity, this is an interesting one. We are definitely seeing, a high level of productivity. Part of that is because people are cutting out commuting time, and some of this is good. So cutting out commuting time is generally a good thing for most of us, but also there are some downsides. So I think we can all attest to the fact that we tend to run our personal time into our professional time. Some of us forget to have lunch and stop and actually disconnect. So disconnecting is an issue, and then that can lead into burnout and some other problems. The other thing we're considering at the moment is productivity is one thing, and that's a really good, positive thing. But we're wondering whether we're as creative and as innovative as we used to be when we could come together face to face. So that's something we're putting into the mix as well when we're coming to talk about and think about how we're going to structure our remote policy and philosophy on a longer term basis. And then most of our employees would also consider that there are advantages for their teams in working in a hybrid or a remote environment, so that it's a plus for them, and that their manager would support them. So there's a trust. They don't consider that if they were to be off-site, that their managers would have concerns around what they would be doing when they're not actually visible. So that's all pretty positive. A very quick word then about what the research is saying, so the external side of things, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. And then this is also important. So several sources on the external research. So why is it important that employees feel good about working remotely, and that it's something we would take into account? That might sound like a fairly obvious question, but when employees are content, satisfied, and productive, it means that they're more likely to stay, and that they're more likely to stay with us. That also means that it's going to be a good solution in terms of retaining them, and that means also at least more productive employees, but it also means cost reductions. It means we're not spending time hiring new people, ramping them up and so on. So retention and attraction is a very big factor in driving HR strategy as well. So here we come to the productivity, the commuting time and so on, which I've already mentioned. And then in terms of the competitive landscape, we all know, certainly in the HR field and further even, that keeping the best people is a major preoccupation for the HR environment, for the HR teams, and for leadership as well. We spend a lot of our time searching for and attempting to keep our top talent. And so, you know, managing to keep the best people is, it gives us a competitive edge. Excuse me. So moving on. So this is where I wanted to look back a little bit on, excuse me, on our experience at Citrix and some of the lessons that we learned 6 months into this experience, which has been, as John mentioned, you know, something of a unique experience certainly in organizational experience and certainly in HR experience. So some of our observation. So in terms of hiring and onboarding, so again, really in the flick of a light switch, we needed to move all of these processes to full-time, you know, 100% remote. So in a culture and an environment like Citrix, where we are not highly process driven, we have something of a personal touch, which is important to us. All of a sudden, we needed to be much more process focused, but also make sure that we were maintaining some of the things that we feel make us a little different to some of our competitors. And that is in conveying our culture and values, which are extremely important to us and which do set us a little apart from some other organizations. So the only way we can do that is in really conveying those in one-on-one interviews. So we needed to increase the number of individual interviews and sometimes panel interviews we were doing with our candidates in order to convey and appropriately assess the right talent for us. So we did need to increase those quite considerably. So that required both our frontline interviewing teams, whether those be in the talent acquisition area or in the business area with our hiring managers and some of our colleagues. It required them to dedicate more time to hiring. And in a sales environment in particular, that's often quite a challenge to take people away from the field and make sure that they're giving the top priority to looking for new people and the right kind of people, the right talent and competencies. We haven't noted any visible decrease in offer take-up so far, but similarly in the onboarding area, so where we have people on probation periods coming into the organization, it's been very important that we really give that white glove treatment, because in an environment where people are joining us completely remotely, so they're sitting, you know, in their kitchens or sitting rooms or offices, moving to another employer in those early days can be, just as I wrote there on the slide, changing a laptop for another laptop, or a you know, one corporate card for another corporate card. So it's really important that we stay very, very close to those people. So again, that's a big question on investing that time and conveying to our first line managers and colleagues that really integrating people fully and in a very qualitative kind of way is essential in those first weeks and months. Otherwise, we could be losing people. We haven't so far in any sort of significant kind of way, but we're very aware that that is a risk. Then moving to the more outside of hiring and onboarding, but the more talent management area. So when I say talent management, I'm thinking about managing our teams, again, retaining them, developing them in this environment. A few of the things that we've noticed over the last few months. So as I say here, what we need to do in the first instance of managing a crisis situation is not necessarily what's going to work a few months later. So I think a crisis is something that's quite high energy. And I think that people, certainly in the Citrix environment, I noticed that people were very high energy. You could say almost a bit hysterical, and we did a lot of cocktail hours. We did a lot of webinars and video conferences. We did the silly hats, we did masks, we did all of that kind of thing, which was fantastic in the first few weeks, and even I'd say probably the first 3 months or so. So a lot of high energy, a lot of fun, and I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. I think that after what I noticed is between, maybe the beginning of the summer, over the summer when people were starting to go on holidays and that sort of thing, that died down a little bit. And I think we went maybe a little flat after that. And I think some of the competencies that we need to ensure that people are still staying connected and are being supported, once that initial crisis period ended and we went into more of this is going to last for a while, or maybe a little different. And when I say those competencies, I think they're things like really becoming an excellent remote manager of remote teams and virtual teams, and leading people and supporting people through uncertainty. Those are some of the things I think, and watching out for employee isolation. The employees who maybe don't do the high energy, funny hats and masks, those people are quieter and they need to be supported in slightly different ways. So those are some of the things I think that that we need to be really looking out for in the sort of the second and ongoing period of this very unusual time. So building that resilience, navigating ambiguity and change is quite different, I think, to the first period of the crisis management time. So those are some of the things that I've noticed and that we have started to build now into our learning and development for our managers and for our leaders as we move forward. So some of those observations. Moving to the next slide. So again, as a bit of an extension of those observations, some tips I think, and this is not rocket science, but some good practices that I have noticed amongst some of our managers and leaders. Really multiplying and diversifying those forms of interactions. So what works with some employees won't work with others. So really looking for various different means of communication and support for employees. So some employees will really speak up when we're doing those employee listening surveys, for example, and you'll get great data back. Some are not, and sometimes this is cultural. Sometimes it's question of nationality, culture, or even just different styles, introverts, extroverts, and so on. Some people will respond really well to surveys, some won't. Some will do great one-on-ones, some won't. So you really need to think about how to eke out, how to draw out those, how employees are doing because it's sometimes you discover when they've just handed in their resignation that they weren't doing so great and you didn't know anything about it. And if that's a really, you know, high performer, high potential, that's going to be a big loss with a big impact on the business. So again, it's worth investing that time. The onboarding we've talked about, very similarly, the return to work. So whether that's maternity, paternity, leave of absence, those reintegration plans, I think have become much more important since everybody is working remotely, and that's going to have consequences, I think, also for the future as we move more or stay in a remote type of working environment. And then, you know, very similarly, certainly at Citrix, we've put the emphasis much more on employee well-being. Some of that is around stress management, some of it's about priority management, delegation, and so on, and some of it is mental wellness. I think we need our managers and our leaders to be really encouraging take-up and demystifying what those resources are for, and that it doesn't mean that somebody is weak if they want to take those up. And then the final point, again, as I mentioned before, you know, wrapping those competency, so skill building and competency building around how to succeed in times of change and uncertainty. And then moving on, this is just a very quick insight, and I will have time for questions, insight into what the factors that we're considering at Citrix into our ongoing strategy around flexible work, which we will probably be thinking about more in terms of a hybrid sort of approach, going back to one of my first points, which is that most of our employees will probably prefer a hybrid work approach, so a mixture of remote and office. So we'll be looking at all of these factors. So one that I haven't mentioned before is the physical space. So defining the office in a flexible work environment, what does that look like? What will we be using office space for? What will that office space look like? How big will it be? Will it be we have office space everywhere? And how will we work with real estate to achieve that redesign, where we will have redesign and flexible spaces. Digital space, my colleagues will be speaking about this a lot more just in a few moments, but ensuring, you know, reliable, effective and secure access to apps and data, and collaboration and teaming tools for hybrid working. And then on the people, programs and practices side of the house, I've mentioned a lot of these, so I won't go into much detail there, but you know, how we live our values and our culture and our brand in a much more remote and hybrid environment. Building all of those manager and leadership competencies, as I've mentioned, you know, health and well-being of our employees, all of those pieces come into our culture, and then all of that wrapped into our continuous listening. So everything that we will do and continue to do will be monitored, and our employees will be feeding into that so that we have our finger on the pulse of what our employees need and want as we move forward. And that 25 minutes in is pretty much what I have for you. So John, do you have questions?
I do, yes. Yes, there's a few questions.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
Here for you. So just, I think the first one that's kind of interest is, do you have a view on how easily Citrix sort of adopted remote working on a sort of geographical and regional basis? Did you see any kind of variations in that?
Oh, that's a great question. On a geographical basis, I would, that's an interesting one. I don't think there were major geographical differences. We had the advantage of being able to follow Asia in that they had already moved some of their bigger locations to the remote model just because they had experience of COVID before we did, before EMEA and before the States did. So we were able to pick up some lessons from them. I would say probably that EMEA was, as we often are, probably a little more reticent. But honestly, I think we all moved pretty easily. I think everybody moved just as quickly. I think the differentiation I would call out, probably more than a geographical differentiation, would be that some pieces of our business were it was a little more difficult for them. So our salespeople were already very used to being out and about and working from wherever they needed to work from. Some of our business units that are much more used to working, in a desk environment and in teams, found it a bit more of a stretch. So I think our engineering and product teams, and also our inside sales teams, who were much more site-based, found it, not that they found it difficult to move, because honestly, we decided that everybody had to do this for health and safety reasons, but they found it more difficult to adapt because just much less used to it. But actually, interestingly enough, now that they have got used to it, I think they're just as keen to keep a hybrid pattern as the other employees.
Okay, no, very good, very good. And kind of looking to the future a little bit, what's the sort of expectation kind of going forward if somebody has had a really positive experience of working from home and feels that actually they really don't want to come back to the office? Is Citrix's view to try to encourage that hybrid model that you talked about, or if somebody really feels either worried about coming back into the office, or is just sees no value in it, is that going to be okay, or are you really trying to encourage people to work at least some time in the office?
Great question. Certainly for the foreseeable future, anybody who's not comfortable coming into the office does not need to come into the office. We're actually, at the moment, we're in a phased approach. So each location, and depending on multiple factors, and one of the, a couple of the major factors are the health and safety environment in that particular location. So that's a country-driven approach. So we have a phased approach. So if the COVID numbers are on the increase, then that phase can move backwards rather than moving forwards. And we've put a number of locations on hold for that exact reason. The other big factor is how the employee individually feels. If the employee doesn't feel comfortable, then they stay out. I think much further down the road, when and if we move to the possibility of employees being able to come to the office, it will be role-based. But at that stage, the assumption is that it will be entirely safe to work from the office. So we're some way off that yet.
Great, fantastic. All right, Sarah, I think we're pretty much questions that people have sent in that we've not had a chance to answer, then we will get back to you individually on those. So Sarah, thank you very much indeed.
Very welcome, and happy to answer any other questions offline. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, so next up, let me introduce Albrecht Weinkopf. He's head of IT infrastructure at Ellipse Life, and we're delighted that he's agreed to share some of the learnings with us from his organization as well during this time. So Albrecht, over to you. Let me just get your audio as well. Albrecht, you'll need to unmute your own audio if you can. Okay, I think we seem to have lost the connection to Albrecht. I can see he's offline here. My suggestion is that we maybe move on to the next session instead, and perhaps we can change the order of the running order for this afternoon. So, Virginie, would you mind moving this over to the final session, and then we can kind of go with that. So, while we work out where Albrecht has gone, so let me introduce you to pair over Johansson and Sasa Petrovic. They're Citrix solution strategists, and they're going to talk a little bit more about the technology side, some of the trends we've seen, and also a little bit about what the future might hold. So I think Pio is going to start. Pio, over to you.
Okay, it seems like Pio can't unmute himself.
There you go. Should be unmuted now.
Thank you. So, yeah, you can hear me now.
Can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh, that's good. You don't want to see me today. I'll put on the webcam. Here we go. I was planning on removing that since due to the performance of Wi-Fi and so on. So hi everyone, and welcome to the session webinar. We had to change things over, and this is what happens. We're in a situation where everything changes on the fly. And Sasha and we will go through some of the points that we've looked at, and also the experience that we have based on what Sara has talked about also today. When it comes to the remote employee experience. So how do we influence this in a positive way? So we will in the next slides go through the overall processes, paths and planning for preparing for the next best way to launch your remote employee experience. And let's see if do I have control, Sasha?
Yes, you have.
There we go. All right, thank you. So this is an overview of the remote cycles that we've seen, and basically it's showing what happens during different periods of the crisis that we are in and that we are going through. So before COVID, we could see that, and also what numbers that Sara mentioned, is that we had about 45% of people being able to work from home. So we had a flat rate or a increasing rate, but it's controlled in how the people were working from home. And then we saw Corona hit. We also saw the effects of the pandemic, and we had a rapid increase of people wanting to work from home or having to work from home due to the effects of Corona that we saw. This was not only a positive effect, but also an effect that we had to push people home. They weren't allowed to be in the office, but we did not all the time have the capabilities to, just because they were working from home wasn't ensured that they were also being productive and efficient. So we are somewhere in the middle of this extended work from home phase and the resilience phase, which means that in the short term, we now see some companies already going into resilience, and some companies are still, an organization are still stuck in the extended work from home phase. But in resilience, we'll see some programs that are based on information and data that they've gathered during the first two steps. So this is where Sara also mentioned the coming back to office, where we see 50% of the workforce maybe are working before lunch and the rest are working after lunch. Or we will see also that we have the people are working 50% from home and 50% from the office. So there will be different versions of this depending on what type of organization you work for. The next normal is more people will be starting working from home. And how do we ensure that this works for all parties involved? So what we're looking at here is that it's most of the time a view an argumentation based on the IT perspective and focus, but it's not taking into account the perspective that IT mostly is driven by algorithms and software, which is not always a positive effect if it's let alone. So it doesn't have the positive effects on productivity, innovation, and engagement at all times. And then adding on top of this, you have machine learning, IoT, robotics, automation, and other things that are tools for working better, so optimizing. But if you aren't aligning them with engagement, enablement, and empowerment of the employees, these things won't happen. So they won't bring the positive effects and increase productivity and efficiency that is expected to happen. So if it's only driven by IT, it will most likely just kill innovation and engagement. So what are we looking at when it comes to transforming to the next normal? So we're looking at the new model, or a newer model, I would say, of remote working and planning. So in these times of uncertainties and unexpected events, as we have seen in the last 6 to 7, 8, 9 months, it's even more important to use a step-by-step approach, because that allows us to be agile. And agile doesn't always mean that we have to do it faster, but we're prepared for the unforeseen events that will occur. And example of this is the corona pandemic now, of course, and also the second wave that's hitting Europe and some countries in Europe at the moment. This also means that we have to have the employees engaged and empowered during the changes. Otherwise, the effects would not occur as we plan on or plan for. This will, in the end, give us a positive effect on the productivity, but even in working from home, we've seen that some of the effects has actually increased in productivity by working from home compared to working in the offices, which is good, because we can look at data and evidence of those scenarios and use cases to actually deliver a better service. So this will, in the end, then, as I said, give a positive effect. The biggest benefit, though, is if you have an agile concept, that you can react quickly for the unforeseen events. And that's a strength that every organization requires more than ever today. And that allows IT managers often to pursue a position where they have a choice to mix best practices and allow the organization to capture the positive effects of letting the end users also be engaged and empowered, and by that also giving feedback to IT, and by that also improving productivity and the quality of work. So these are things that Sara also mentioned in her presentation. So the strategic planning mindset is vital to adjust, just beside the technology, also planning mindsets in accordance to the new situation we're in. The way how we strategically plan for the organizational workplace might not work anymore, because it's a fast moving. We don't know actually what's going on in the future, and we can't plan for it. We can just be prepared to be fast-paced, moving quickly for the changes. So the framework is separated in phases, which eventually enables you to associate your activities short, mid, and long term, and the goals connected to them. And although we're using separate phases and milestones, it is important to highlight that every phase, in this case, builds upon previous outcomes. So we go back and check and see what happened, what was the outcome, how did this happen? So we're using, instead of timelines, we're aligning the goals based on data, evidence, and certainties. Events which are highly probable and which already with sufficient data where that exists, we can typically more see them as tangible and concrete, and therefore those activities would be easiest to approach first. Because the planning with more detailed data and higher certainty is definitely simpler to do than compared to long-term goals where you don't know actually what's going on. So the linear versus dynamic planning. So a way that we looked at it before was plan, launch, check and see what happens, and then you do some amendments at the end and you work with it. But nowadays we think, and we understand also, looking at data that we've gathered, that the dynamic planning is more of importance than before. So in today's end user services, we have the possibility of using analytics as an example to build continuous improvement of strategies. But what happens if that environment around us changes and becomes more unpredictable? What do we do then? So previously, the end user was also a source of data to use for optimization and improvements, but today we can't rely on this data alone. So unless the data you have, or the less data you have, the more uncertainty the outcomes are. So this also is a reason why you have to have a flexibility included in your mid and long-term goals. And generally, a linear approach, the one to the left, is a one-way road. So you plan, you check, you launch, and then you go to the next one with milestones. And it's very static. And it will cause, in times like this, it will cause a situation where you're trying to fit a square in a round hole just because the hole was squared when you started in the beginning. Doesn't mean that it has to be squared at the end, which is a situation that we have now. So these unforeseen events, they create chaos and overhead costs. And of course, also the lack of agility and flexibility. So therefore, it's important not to plan for one path or scenario. It's defining a plan A thoroughly, using the data, the information we have from previous experience, but also planning for B and C in steps, because if the first option doesn't work, you need to be prepared for something else. So this approach will allow you to react quicker and give you a smoother ride through the crisis, and to be better prepared for the next normal when that comes. And this is a view then of the dynamic planning. So what I meant here was the planning for strategically A, but be flexible to adopt for changes when the uncertainties appear. So you can move to B or C, move forward, which means that you will be more dynamic in the approach, and you can also deliver the solutions in a better way. So creating a workplace strategy in response to the COVID-19 events. Since we now know how to approach it strategically, let's look closer at the different kind of workplace transformation stages that we looked at and are related to the challenges that were triggered by COVID-19 and pandemic. So if we look at the first stage, which is the crisis triage stage phase, sorry, that was hard to say. Let's face the truth here. Even though we all were prepared for at least in theory, for a nice disaster plan that we had on our shelves that we will use, we all got surprised quickly. This happened within a month or two, and it went from 0 to 100 instantly. So the unforeseen events with an instant impact on society and our lives has outlined the ruthlessness, or has shown us our weaknesses that we have in the system and environment. So some companies have been flexible and been able to adopt, and some haven't. We have actually seen some companies that we thought would be companies that we would live with forever. They haven't been able to adopt and change, which means that they're actually looking at operational losses, and also might be able to or have to shut down. Although most of the countries and companies have passed through this stage, the events and results of the phase will remain relevant for a long time. So this is where we mean that we need to look at the happenings here, collect the data and gather the information and the experiences to move forward into the next stage also. And that's how we start building the mid and long-term goals. So the extended work from home phase, and as you see, we are right at the end of this one. Some companies have moved over to the resilience phase, but most, I would say, would be extended work from home phase and still in there. So as many compromises were made during the crisis phase, the first one that we saw, it's critical to get an exact understanding what the impacts were. So the changes in the crisis phase, they had an effect mostly on security and performance of infrastructure. So, excuse me, the reasons why we say that is because maybe the companies weren't organizations were prepared to have that huge number of people moving from an office where you had set up the network and firewalls, move them out to the homes where they were communicating in different ways. They were sharing information, they were using Zoom, Teams, and other places where they shared content, which wasn't the normal way, I would say, to work. So these are things that we gathered and we made sure that we could actually set requirements and meet those requirements also. So regardless of the long-term strategy, it's apparent that in our workplace transformation, the employees has to be put into the center, like we said, and also Sara mentioned, of the planning activities. We cannot only rely on planning for IT, we need to understand what makes the employee or the end user or the consumer of the services, how they consume this, and they want to consume it in their way to become productive and efficient. What we then do is look at, by gathering information, making sure that we have a setup for the employees, we move that over to the resilience phase. So one of the key midterm goals is certainly to have your infrastructure ready to perform in office and remote state without friction. So by choice, the customer or the end user or the end consumer of the services have a choice themselves to be able to work from home or in the office. So it has to work in both spaces. And both operation modes should have no impacts on the end user and IT experience. Otherwise, this gain will lead to operational losses again. So we need to have the engagement, empowerment, and involvement from the users to actually build this on the planning for the mid and long term also. So the next normal phase that we're looking at is how to reinvent workplace in the longer term. Is it going to change? Yeah, we think so. But why? It's just to compare the way how we're working and using technology in the private life. So looking at our kids and ourselves, how we are consuming IT now when we're sitting at home is different. So we're working on many devices and they're also available and used in private life and in work. And the majority of the workforce still uses the same type of company devices as they've done for decades. But to ensure that the superior user experience is offered, the users have to have the choice of freedom and how to set up the work that they want to do. And that's basically because every individual has its own preferences and requirements. So that's also something that Sara mentioned in her presentation, depending on where you are. So the inside sales teams weren't used to working from home, but they still now needed to do that. So we needed to set a platform for them that could supply that service to them so they were feeling comfortable also. So on top of that, automation and artificial intelligence will be used to further improve employee productivity. And similar to the industrialization period that we had, where physical machines used to relieve human and increase productivity, we will also face the same transformation on office space and the workspace here. Key thing though is involving employees and the users. Otherwise, we'll kill innovation and creativity and only deliver IT, which is not going to help us drive any productivity increases. So it's evident that employee experience will gain even more attention within the companies because it has a direct impact on the company growth, plans, and talent retention, like Sara mentioned. So there is a need to enable the managers and organizations to combine optimization efforts, which could be cost cuts, and sadly also in these days has been a question of layoffs. And combining that with the forces of experience, engagement, and empowerment from the employees. And this is where Citrix has a role to play and can enable the most efficient combination for the optimization and engagement to reach those maximum outcomes of productivity and user experience and efficiency. And Sasa, he will move into some of the examples that we have and get a little bit deeper on how we will do this for our customers and partners. So the scene is yours, Sasha.
Great, thank you, Pio. So Pio has explained the strategic elements, how to plan. I think it's evident it's important to plan also in phases. And he also showed the way how to go to the next normal. But let's have a closer look to the next new normal stage, because that's probably not the end goal, it's the longer term vision we all would like to achieve. Typically, when you talk about vision related to workplaces, you always hear digital workplace, or actually a future modern workplace. Don't call your project anymore digital workplace. And the reason is simple. If you talk about digital workplace, you are limiting yourself just to the technology aspects. As you have seen also in Sarah's session, we have to go beyond the technology, right? We have to put actually the user or the employee into the center of our planning. So even though you are a techie, the non-technical content also presented by Sarah will impact you as well. You don't believe me? If you don't believe me, believe Gartner. So, let me check. So moving. So this is the Gartner hype cycle, 2 weeks old, and it shows all the digital workplace trends of 2020. It actually summarizes all the trends for the next couple of years, I think up to 10 years. And there are some elements, if you go quickly through the list, you will see trends and terms such as employee wellness, employee experience, employee productivity. So these are all items which are not 100% related to the technology aspects. The highlighted trends over here are trends where Citrix is also working actively. So all of these items, and employee wellness, for example, as well, is something that we have on our agenda to ensure that we can then ultimately elevate the digital workplace from of today. One point which is also very important, but which we are going to talk in more detail afterwards, is micro apps. So this is also apparent, not only something Citrix is following, so the entire industry is looking for new ways how to increase the efficiency. When we talk about employee productivity, we have 3 pillars. We have productivity, efficiency, and engagement. So we need these 3 pillars in order to elevate the employee experience. And these 3 pillars are even more important ever since Corona or COVID-19, because now we have on top remote employee experience, and these parts are then a little bit more critical to fulfill. When we look at the employee productivity topic itself, this is probably one of the most important topics every C-level person has. When I go to roundtables, or when I host roundtables with C-level person, it often happens that I'm doing the introduction, but afterwards I can't speak anymore because they have already very intensive conversations. So this confirms that actually productivity is certainly something everyone has on its agenda. There are 2 ways how to increase productivity. The first way is to just work more. But let's face the truth, no one would like to work more. So the solution is actually that every hour becomes more productive. This can be done through better education, but also to better machine at our disposal. We will come back to this point later. Engagement matters. So 84% of all the people, or Gallup made a research in Germany, and they discovered that 84% of all the employees are not engaged or actively disengaged. What does this mean? The impact is huge. 214 to 287 billion euros in costs, or in cost loss per year. For me, this number is a little bit too high. Oh, sorry, Pio, you have. Yeah. So this number is too high, but it gives you an indication or an impression that engagement is important. And again, this is not about technology. We have to take care of all the elements Sarah has mentioned as well in order to be able to provide a higher productivity. Otherwise, you have the best technology in place, but you have no engagement, and then the productivity will not increase. So let's talk about efficiency. And I would like also to make a few examples when it comes to efficiency and Citrix workspace. For us, especially in this situation, it's important that we can provide a consistent workplace. So when your user is in the office, and when the user goes back to home, or when he or she needs to work from home, it's very important and critical that the environment looks consistent, the user experience is consistent. Otherwise, the people will struggle because they can't follow their daily routine. They might need to prepare something in addition. They will lose time just because they have to prepare something in addition. And additionally, it can happen that the frustration level also increases. Ultimately, this again has an impact on productivity. So it's important for us, and ever since we have released Citrix Workspace, ever since we have our Citrix Cloud solution, Citrix Workspace guarantees a consistency across all the platforms, across all the devices, regardless of the location you are working. Now, this is already available today, but let's have a future look. Let's look one step further. And what we see quite often, also in all of our conversations with other industry leaders, with partners, with customers, is automation will increase. Also simplification. The goal is actually to simplify the work routine and the work process through automation. And what we would like to present over here is our micro app, or our intelligence features. So this is Citrix Workspace, and with our intelligence features, we are able to integrate the applications. So instead of using Workday natively, or opening Concur to approve expense reports, you don't have to open these programs anymore. You can use the feeds. You can use also action items here in order to speed up the work process. So this is an example. So instead of opening ServiceNow, do the authentication, navigating through all the elements until you are getting to the right request button, you can just easily create the ticket from the workspace portal centrally. Also for Workday, for example, instead of opening Workday, doing all the processes within Workday, especially navigation takes time, you can do it directly in the portal. What we have seen also with some customers and also with some tests, that we can in average reduce the time of every employee, or actually we can increase the productivity to 5 to 10 minutes per day. And I think that's huge if you are considering also especially large environments. So we have talked a lot about employee experience, about the technology or the technology aspects, but everything needs to be under the umbrella of security. So the security and also employee experience has to be in balance. And the term I like most is actually zero trust, or especially because I really like also the way how Citrix does zero trust, to be on the same page. What is zero trust? So in my eyes, it's never trust, always verify, just-in-time access, and just enough access. So when we look at the different kind of zero trust, or let's say if we look at the circumstances we had in the past, where we had a client-server connection, where the vast majority of the employees were working in the office, the data was also located and transmitted internally. That was not a risk at that time. Now all of a sudden, the bigger part of the employees are working outside of the internal network. And that means also that the data is stored outside of your network, or outside of your data center. And also it means that the data is processed on your notebook, which might not be connected to your internal network. So this increases the exposure. What we are doing, our concept is slightly different. So instead of actually taking the data away, or moving the data away from the internal network, with Citrix, we ensure that the data stays in the data center. We are only transmitting the screen. So you just see the screen parts. And regardless of the application type, this can be a desktop, this can be a content, this can be also a web application, we ensure that the data will remain in the internal network. So what we would like to give you as a takeaway is some sort of a checklist. I think the first thing, and probably the most important topic, is you have to assess your remote work environment. There are implications on the security and performance circumstances. Look first at the security circumstances or at the security environment. You have to assess the security in your environment to ensure you have proper security, because the environment has changed. And additionally, also you have to look at the performance. People working outside of the company have to work with a fast environment in order that you can ensure that the adoption will take place, that the people will like to work from home. Second, you need to be ready for the next crisis. So we see a second wave. This means you would have to ensure that the people can transition fast and quickly from office back to home. And the third point is you need to start now to re-evaluate your workplace strategy. As we said before, gather a profound understanding of your user needs. And also when you are creating a long-term strategy, be bold, try to look ahead. Otherwise you have to catch up with other trends and also with your competitors. So in order to do that, let's stay in touch. We can help you here as well. We would like to offer you also strategic workshops. This can be also design thinking workshops in order to elevate or to validate the right strategy, also from the short-term, mid-term, and long-term perspective. We can also help you to look at the cost aspects through business value engineering workshops, where we are going to understand your financial metrics in order to be able to provide cost savings, but more important, also business values to your line of business. Third, we would also like to offer you infrastructure transformation workshops. These workshops are a little bit more focused on the technology. So these workshops will be also conducted by our enterprise architects. And last but not least, especially in Europe, we see sustainability, or the topic sustainability is trending and increasing. We would also like to help you to look from the IT perspective how you can achieve or contribute to your sustainability targets. Good, this is it. Any questions?
Thanks, Sasha, and thanks, Pio, earlier as well. We've actually kind of gone over time a fraction here, but just very, very quick question for you. Is there sort of one or maybe two examples of things that we've seen during the pandemic crisis that we would kind of mark out as perhaps bad practice, things that we've seen that really haven't worked well? Do you have any examples of that you've kind of come across?
Yeah, I think we can give two examples. So we are aware of one customer who wasn't able actually to transition fast to remote work. If I'm not mistaken, they had 25% of all the people couldn't work from home. So this had a huge impact on the operation, right? So the people were limited and they couldn't actually contribute anymore. The company, so to say, had to some certain degree also a lockdown, right? On the other hand, we had one of our largest customer with over 200,000 users were able just to immediately switch to remote work because their entire platform, so all the users are working already with Citrix. So for them, it wasn't a challenge. The only challenge they had is actually they had to increase the scalability of the networking components because of the larger user force from working from remote. But apart from that, they could just continue as before.
Fantastic. Good. Excellent. Thanks, Sasha. Appreciate you sharing that information. Thanks, Pio, earlier. So, okay, just bearing time in mind, let's see if we've managed to solve our technical challenges with Albrecht Weinkopf, who's head of IT infrastructure at Ellipse Life, which is part of Swiss Re. So I'm hoping that Albrecht is available to present.
I'm here, guys. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. If you want to share the screen, Albrecht, that would be great.
Yes, I will do that.
Fantastic. We can see that.
Perfect. Excellent.
There we go. you're all set.
Perfect. Thank you very much again, and sorry for the disconnection before, guys. I had a short disconnect. So yeah, I think we have heard today a couple of very interesting points from the various presenters before me. Some things might be duplicated also in my presentation, but that doesn't matter. We can skip over them. So thank you for joining this session today. Today, I want to give you a short introduction of how we at the Swiss Re Group and also at Ellipse Life have tackled modern remote work in the hybrid cloud area. I want to give you a short introduction of what we have done also on the technical side, a bit more, and also what challenges we have faced, and also what lessons learned we did take out of the last, I would say, 1 year or 6 months in total. In general, give you a short introduction. Swiss Re Group is a huge company with more than 15,000 employees globally. We here at Ellipse Life are a 100% daughter company of Swiss Re, and together we're really trying to do a big cloud transformation. Currently, it's still on the go, but we have luckily before COVID also started to investigate into our remote work solution, which is basically that we provide the Citrix virtual desktops to all of our workforce, where they can remotely connect to their work environment and work over the internet. Let's go to the next slide. So already in 2019, basically, we have identified a couple of challenges with our current Citrix environment that was hosted currently on-premise in the Swiss Re data center in Zurich. This picture for the technology guys in the audience is quite familiar, I guess. It basically shows the current normal Citrix environment that everyone has in their data center, and we have identified a couple of challenges with it. So the first one that we have identified is basically that, yeah, the classic one, it doesn't really scale easily. Most of the time you have building blocks in your data center that are sized for a certain principle, and if you want to expand it or fastly expand it, you're somehow limited to the, I would say, to the hardware that you have inside your data center. Beside that, the next point that we have identified as an issue is it's basically an always-on environment. If our business basically needs to scale up or down during the year, we cannot really get some, how to say, cost savings, because we say, okay, for half a year we power off the machines, and because the business case is not there for half a year, so it's basically running 24/7 in the data center. That somehow limits our possibility to be cost efficient. On top of that, of course, we also have had some issues where we said we wanted to provide specific use cases. We wanted to have, for example, GPU accelerated machines where the engineers or the NetCat disaster experts can modelize some catastrophes or impact on certain regions, for example, from hurricanes. And this is something that we also couldn't provide by then. A next important thing, I think, that was hit by everyone also in IT in 2019 and also 2018 was the huge impact that all the security issues on the Intel chip side had. So we have measured actually that by the meltdown inspect the security fixes for the Intel CPUs, we had about 30% performance impact on the virtual desktops that we provide. So this we needed to have addressed. At Swiss Re, we also had used a certain private cloud, and we had the issue that basically our Citrix environment could not directly natively talk to this private cloud, and that of course made it for operations a bit tedious when we wanted to roll something out or scale and stuff like that. So we wanted to have something where we said, okay, this is basically it's possible that we can have a native interface between the Citrix environment and the infrastructure underneath it. Beside that, also a well-known fact, normally if you have your data center, you're somehow, I would say, region locked to your data center. So if, for example, business decides to merge or to buy a certain branch in Asia, you're most of the time not able to say, okay, tomorrow you need like 500 VDIs in Singapore. We can provide them to you by, let's say, in 2 months or next month, whatever. And this already before COVID made us think, how can we actually improve the situation in our Citrix environment, and how can we make the remote work experience for our colleagues all around the world a better one and a more enjoyable one also. And then of course, like it came, COVID was also hitting us at Swiss Re, and we had really on overall IT, we had quite an impact on, I would say, on the remote work experience, because like we have heard today, there are many different items need to be considered. First and foremost, our global Citrix environment basically became from one day it became just mission critical. Before it was already highly critical, but really our remote work solution and also the access network there became mission critical. This meant we have increased monitoring efforts. We had to really be on a 24/7, continuously monitoring all the access pipes, the complete Citrix environment, everything just needed to work. That was really important. Like we have heard from Sasha today, also we had to expand our global network access capacity by nearly 100% in some locations, because we have had more people coming in over the VPN, we had more people coming in over Citrix, so we really on our global network expanded quite a lot. Yeah, we also had some not so nice things. So basically our current on-prem capacity was like somehow hitting the capacity limit, and we somehow had to downsize the virtual machines to be able to actually have more users on the platform. That of course had a user impact, which was not so great. And so we really have been focusing on how can we solve these issues with the data center, with the building blocks. And that leads to the next point. Basically, expansion capabilities to Microsoft Azure became priority one. We were in the lucky situation that also already before COVID, we have actually started to work together with Citrix and Microsoft to switch our workloads to the Citrix cloud, to basically build up a global Azure environment where we can host workloads dynamically across the globe. And we have been not completed, but we already have been on the way with it when COVID hit us. So from a management point of view, this integration and getting this stuff ready became priority one. On top of that, Citrix is not only Citrix, of course, it's also the workplace. It's a combined experience. Stuff just needs to work. You need to be able to do video calls. You want to make meetings. You want to share stuff. So that's why also together with Microsoft, we really fast-tracked the rollout of Microsoft Teams. Before we were running on Skype. But this was really an important thing of the employee experience, that we want to make sure that, yes, we want to give them the new virtual desktop that is running in Azure, and we also want to give them all the good things all out of Office 365. And also here, yeah, of course, maybe some of you have also had this issue that if you're a global company and you're dependent, for example, on a hardware provider like Lenovo or Dell, also these guys got issues when in their production facilities. So basically, some stocks were low, and then we also had issues that couldn't supply notebooks anymore. That's why we really had to make the move on Azure. Yeah, also this we have heard, the cost pressure, of course, in the business is enormous during the COVID crisis, and that also has led to being more, how to say, thought about how you handle IT. Maybe you don't want to over scale up, you also want to scale down, and that needs to be possible to save costs. How have we solved it? So basically, this is on a high level how the architecture that we have put into place. We really have to say we switched our global on-premise Citrix environment to the Citrix cloud, to one single management plane basically, and to this management plane we have hooked up our different workload locations. So we have some workload, for example, in Azure in Switzerland. We have some stuff in the Swisscom cloud in Switzerland. We have for our Asian users specifically built up an Azure environment in Singapore, and that has really for the Asian region made a massive impact. The benefits that I mentioned before is scalability. Yes, so right now we can really say, okay, if business wants to expand in the US, we can ramp up a region in the US, and basically from the first weeks when the merger has been finished, we can provide them, our new colleagues, a complete virtual workplace experience running on Citrix in Microsoft Azure. Beside that, we have had also been possible to scale down our current on-premise infrastructure because we have multiple Citrix farm on-premise. We switched it now all to the Citrix cloud, so we basically don't have the operational overhead anymore to manage 3 or 4 different environments. That also was a benefit that basically helped operations to focus on really what the issues of the users are rather than fixing the environment. These are also shortly mentioned. So yeah, it's an on-demand environment. So in Azure, we can easily really just say during this season, we need this amount of machines where we scale them up, and in these seasons, we don't need that anymore, then we can scale it down. And that has made a huge impact also on the business. Like I said, the special use case machines can also be offered in Azure. So we basically made the POC together with our Netcat experts, and where we basically provided NVIDIA GPU accelerated VDIs to them so that they can run their Netcat simulations directly on the Citrix VDI with the GPU acceleration that they need. This was also an important point from my side. So basically, what the great thing about the Citrix Cloud is it can natively talk to Microsoft Azure over APIs. There is not much integration effort needed. It's really just straightforward, and it really works quite solidly. Since we are running basically in Microsoft Azure and also on-premise in a hybrid world, we have most of the time seen that the issues we had were more like on the on-premise side and not so much the cloud side. So this is really quite a robust integration, which we are quite happy with. So I want to quickly jump then to looking at the time. Yes, to the lessons learned. So of course, this was quite a large transformation project that we have run, and I was the project manager for this project. And I had to say, really, it was quite a challenge. It was very interesting, and it was the benefits that we did get out of it were really also visible for the business. But first and foremost, expect the unexpected. Infrastructure needs to be scalable. I mean, that's an all-time classic, I guess. We all know it, but talking about the BCM plans and stuff like that, we have heard it already before. I mean, nearly every big company has a BCM plan, but only in times of crisis, you actually see how good your BCM plan really is. Next point from my side is really like, get the right partners with the right experience to work with your internal engineers. Like I have said, Swiss Re is in a lucky situation that we have a great strategic partnership together with Citrix and Microsoft. We basically can work directly with the experts from Citrix and directly with the expert from Microsoft to really build a global scale infrastructure that is just fit for purpose. And that was, for me, one of the nicest things to see in this project, really this cross company working together, Swiss Re, Ellipse Live, Citrix, Microsoft, everyone together to make it work. And this was for me one of the most nicest things to see. So this was also an important point from my side, as I'm also a bit of a techie, so I love to work on the technology edge, on new solutions, really build up to the latest and greatest is really great, but sometimes it can also be very painful. So, because when we started with the Microsoft Azure integration of the Citrix Cloud in 2019, most of the features we were using were in preview, either preview on Citrix or preview on Microsoft Azure. So we, for example, used global VNet peering, we used Azure files or Azure NetApp files before for the profiles. FS Logic got moved to Microsoft, so it was a lot of technology change going on. And this kind of things, if you want to live on the technology edge, you need to plan in some extra time to really fix issues. And you can expect the unexpected, because every time you use preview features, something might go south very, very fast. So yeah, it was interesting. It was a huge learning for my whole team and also for the company. And I think this was great undertaking together with Citrix and Microsoft. This is also an all-time classic. Try to use as much off-the-shelf solutions as possible. We really tried to use as much as possible out of Microsoft Azure. When we talk about profiles, for example, we didn't want to build up file servers in Azure as an EIS platform. We wanted to use something natively like Azure Files, which is basically a PaaS or even a SaaS service. That comes with challenges. Also, how you build your systems, because it's a mindset question also of people involved. So people, if you have engineers who really enjoy working their stuff up from the ground, it's a different aspect than say, okay, let's go first to look at Azure, what it can offer natively, and only if you don't find something, build it yourself. That is a mindset question or a mindset change that you need to guide your team through. This one is also really, I cannot stretch this point more than, because it's really hugely important. What I tried in this project is, before it was always, specifically with cloud topics, it was always like, okay, IT does something, then they do solutionize, and then they bring it to the CISO office and to the security guys and say, here's our solution, and now you judge it. And that has shown to be never really be working very well. So what I tried in this project from day one is basically get the right experts directly in the project team, get the CISO, the InfoSec people, get the compliance people into the project team from day one, and make basically the solution their own. So really sit together with the InfoSec people, do a blueprint, do work with Microsoft on questions about security, really already at the beginning, because then at the closure of the project, it was really just ticking a box for them, because they already have built it up themselves. They did know all of the challenges and also the security things that might be relevant for the whole company. So this was really a huge success. Bring the people in on day one and not just hand them over your design when you're finished with it. Another important lessons learned is also this one, because this is normally when you build something up brand new, you maybe don't think so much about what do we do when something very bad happens, if the cloud is down, and then you might hear, the cloud is never down, but that's also not true. So what you really need to understand is have a solid escalation path to your cloud vendors, being it Microsoft and Citrix, what to do when something goes very wrong. Because what you need to do, if you have a mission critical platform, you need to have fast access to the right people inside Citrix, inside Microsoft. You need to be able to escalate quickly so that you also get what you need. Because if our global Citrix infrastructure is like down, we cannot spend hours in, I would say, level 1 queue of Citrix support explaining what the issue really is. We really need to have fast access to the people who can fix what is broken, because it's a mission critical system. And that the same goes for Microsoft. It's we all know something, the cloud is great and it works most of the time, but there can also be stuff that doesn't work sometimes. And the more you go into the shared responsibility model, also your senior management needs to understand that there might be situations where your internal engineer cannot do anything anymore. If something is broken, I would say in Southeast Asia region in Azure, and the VDIs cannot boot, there is nothing that the internal engineer can fix it. We need to wait for Microsoft to fix the issue, and then we can do after that continue our work. And this is also a learning curve for everyone involved, specifically for senior management. And last but not least, the classic one, we have also heard it a couple of times before. So use automation for cloud provisioning and management. I cannot stretch this point more. It's really very, very important. There should be no click deployments anymore in Azure. Azure is a scalable platform that works best if you automate it. So this means really what we try to do is, for example, our whole resource regions in Azure, there is no click, there's no manual task involved in this. What we have done is basically we have used Azure Blueprints to automate with PowerShell and the Azure API, basically our complete end-to-end region deployment for the Citrix cloud. So this includes NetScaler, this includes the DM sets, this includes really the global VNet peerings that are needed to make the transit network work. Everything is really PowerShell, and it's an automated blueprint. So this means when somebody comes around the corner and says to you, I have bought a new company, which is like operating out of, let's say, South US or Brazil or wherever, you can really just say, okay, we need to have a core foundation. You change the parameters in your deployment script and you hand the deployment over to Azure to really deploy the complete resource location in whatever Azure region is needed. So and after one day, it's up and running and you can start using it. And only this gives you the flexibility that the business needs if you have automated it. If you're all running with I would say GUI ninjas, people like clicking through the Azure portal, also that's very error prone and it just takes too long. This was really something for us that I cannot stretch more. It was also a mindset question because also in my team, we didn't have so much experience with automation, but for me, I was really like evangelizing this from day one. We need all of our deployments need to be automated so that we can create a new master target or a new image in the morning, have it automatically pushed to Azure Image Gallery, build the master out of the Azure Image Gallery in Azure, and then start deploying this machine to the Azure workers. Good. Looking at the time, I think I was quite okay. Then yeah, that was it for me. Thanks for your attention, and if you have any questions, feel free to shout.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Very insightful and I hope useful for our audience. So appreciate learnings with us. I think we have time for maybe one question, and the question I'd like to put to you is, if you think about some of those lessons learned, if there's one thing that you would like to change in the way that you approach the whole, what would that kind of one big difference, different approach be?
Good question. So what I would maybe like to change is would like to have change is make the project or raise the importance of this project quite earlier. Because like I said, we started in 2019, but I would say really this transformation to the hybrid cloud for our Citrix environment was like on the IT project chart, maybe mid-priority, because nobody did expect COVID situation and stuff like that. So really what I maybe would have done differently, I would have made to the senior manager, make it more clear that this project actually is much more up the pipe, should be much more important because it provides so many more intangible benefits also for users. So like I said, if you're working from Asia, Singapore, for example, if you're connecting now to Zurich over a 200 millisecond delay to your Citrix environment, that's not productive. And really, by shifting this workload to the Asia region, we can cut down this 200 milliseconds to like 30. This has a huge user productivity impact for the people every day working on this platform. So this was something where I say, really, this transformative approach where you transform your on-premise environment to a hybrid cloud is really very, very important.
Great, no, really, really good point. I think we've seen that a lot with some organizations. The frustrating user experience is in these times is very counterproductive. So no, appreciate that. Thank you very much, Albrecht. Thank you again for taking the time to share all this with us. Very, very useful presentation.
Welcome.
So, thank you. So we now come to the sort of final minute or so of the time allotted, and didn't want to leave you with nothing to kind of carry on with. So just wanted to point out that we have our series of Citrix or Citrix Summit series approaching in October, and it's divided into sort of three kind of sub events. Cloud, on workspace, and on security. This is obviously a virtual event in these times. So if you're interested in kind of learning more, digging into some of the things we've talked about today, learning about some of the new announcements and things that are coming from Citrix, then please do register for this event. And I think it'll be very, very useful and insightful. So with that, I think we draw the session to a close. Thank you so much for joining us, taking an hour and a half out of your day to be with us and hear about some of these insights. I hope it's been useful for you. I would encourage you, if you could, please to fill in the feedback form that will come through to you very shortly. And we hope to see you on one of these sessions again in the future. Thanks very much indeed.